policy framework in place, I think that will provide monetary stability to the economy. And the financial stability is right now broadly governed by getting governed by Basel. It's all about liquidity and capital adequacy and counter-cyclical offering. A lot of individual, there's a very broad points, but a lot of work is happening in these areas to ensure stability in the long run. So what are the things like going forward? We look in the as I said, economy is going to grow around 2.5 to 3 times over the next 10 years. Maybe the investment needs will be much more than that. And as I said, the financing is going to shift from a bank model to the market model. So the growth in the corporate bond market maybe will be 5-6 times or even more than that. So it is very essential to develop the market and take it to a next level. And if you look at corporate bond market as a percent of GDP, India is in the bottom quartile, I would say. And like as we go, and maybe after 10 years we will be somewhere in the middle of the pack. We have to go there instead if we want to achieve 6 to 7 on a conservative basis, 6 to 7% kind of growth for next 10 years. So some of the suggestions which I would say not very. I'm not saying asking for too many things. Allow these or not big ideas, very small ideas, mainly learned from our experience in the government bond market, which has really grown during the last 10 years. I think the heart of it is a proper settlement system. The DVP3 settlement system, which has been there in the government bond market, I want it to be extended to the corporate bonds. There are a lot of pros and cons, but right now most of the regulators are just looking at the market is not very liquid, we cannot give this facility. But I think it's a chicken and egg situation. I have a feeling we are at the cusp of breaking out. I guess the size of the corporate bond market is around 16 lakh crores, which is where, let's say, government bond market was around 10 years back, and after that we saw the real boom. I think corporate bond market is reaching that stage right now. I think we should go for electronic trading and DVP3 settlement that can take it to the another level. Also, the primary market, primary dealer model in the government bond has been very successful. We should have a similar model for the corporate bonds. Maybe we can ask the existing primary dealers to do the work for government bonds. They have the experience, they can do a good job. I think that will really help. Also, other points which I mentioned is reduce the transaction cost. In terms have uniform tax, uniform duties in all over the world. Right now, it's a state subject. It varies from state to state. I think we should take care of that. Also, some development of the CDS, that the derivative credit default swap market can help, but I guess that will come after we have a more liquid corporate bond market. This is the last slide I want to leave you guys with. It's in everybody's interest for the corporate bond to start. If you this is the current state of the market. I put a cloud because I think bank financing, which is actually the major part, in a different plane, a different cloud altogether. In a sense, you have a AAA curve which is very flat right now, around 8.25 to 8.5. You have a AA company can borrow in the market between 9 to 9.5. All the bank base rate is above 9.5, maybe 9.5 to 10.5. So they're in a different world, but corporates still depend on banks to borrow. I think time has come, corporates also to take initiative, just demand with a bank, like I want part of my financing in the form of bonds. It's not that every corporate is desperate to borrow. There are times banks have also competition among themselves to lend to you. So use this as a marketing tool that I want my corporate financing in the form of bonds. Initially, don't mind, like even if the market rate is at 9% or 9.5%, give the banks 50 basis points higher, which will be still lower than your cost which you are borrowing from the bank. Banks also will be interested, but once the market develops, I'm telling you the rate of the competition will be so much, because there's so many players outside banks are so important, like mutual funds, insurance companies, FIIs, and they are going to grow faster than these banks. So just get them involved, get into the corporate bond market. It's all develop the corporate bond market. As it becomes liquid, it's going to help all of us. With that, I'll stop here for any.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions to you, which I'll be definitely asking. I must say that both these presentations are exceedingly well, and I'm personally benefited by both your presentations. Particularly, I have in my background more than $1.5 billion FCCB issue, $1.9 billion equity issue in London stock market. I have about $2.5 billion of debt market instrument issues, besides plenty of dollars of borrowings, etc. So having had that, I have Mr. Naik. I know that we have to wind up very soon. I have just two questions to you, Dr. Naik. First question is, after 11,000 crore of capital market issue by Reliance Power, in which I had a participation also, and subsequently one or two more large issues, precisely the Indian primary capital market is dull. It is more dull. A PwC report says that by 2030, between 2020 to 2030, the entire world will shift to emerging market, and one of the largest market for where the world of investors will get into is the Indian capital market. One question now coming to you is that why and for what reasons Indian capital market is dull, although there is huge potentials, people are wanting to come here because equity is not there, debt is not there. What one or two more major reasons of the Indian capital market is dull, and what is to be done to increase it? You said about small scale, that's fine, and we are seeing lots and lots of activism in mid cap and small cap. So what India needs to do to make Indian primary capital market more vibrant? That's my first question. And second question is, what do you see in my hypothetical question? Indian capital market, primary, secondary minus FIIs, what happens?
The very important question is the primary market. We have seen a big increase in the prices of equities in the secondary market. But if you see, the primary market is almost dull. Now, it was dull because before this rise, the market has remained stagnant for nearly 4 years.
That's right.
So, with that kind of a scenario, and there wasn't also much appetite from the corporate sector, because most of the corporates had enough liquidity to, so they didn't come to the primary market except for certain industries like telecom, power.
But they went abroad, like I went abroad with Essar Energy PLC,
yeah.
$1.9 billion.
Yeah, but that was abroad. Indian investor, it didn't come to the primary market. What I'm saying is, you are asking about primary market in India, new issues market.
Right.
See, new issues market has remained dull because Indian corporates went abroad and borrowed abroad. Borrowed means raised money abroad through through the equity issues as well as the debt issues and the bond issues. But in India, primary market has remained almost stagnant for last few years.
What SEBI should do to bring activism?
Well, I would suggest a few important things. First is that, for example, today I think the Tata Motors issue is coming now. It's a rights issue. What what corporates should do is that one area is the debt market, debt issues.
I'll come to that.
Second is the equity issues. What is happening is, earlier we had several other instruments like convertible debentures, which gave a little bit of incentive to the small investors in terms of interest, and then got converted into equity. Now, we are all going for equity. Most of the corporates earlier went in equity, and they went in a very high pricing. You know, the most important thing in a primary market is use the pricing. If the pricing is investor friendly, then the investor confidence goes up. Once the investor confidence goes up, more corporates come in. Today, if you go to the underwriter, he said, please don't come, primary market issue will not be possible.
SEBI has come up with the price protection clause for the retail investors.
No, price protection is not. See, I wouldn't say any protection. I would say the pricing has to be come.
I completely agree with you that ambitious pricing and overpricing is a problem in the Indian capital market.
So one is the investor friendly pricing, not only by the Indian private corporate, but also by public sector, because out of 1/3 of our market capitalization is public sector, but only 10% of shares are with public.
That's right.
And out of which majority is owned by the institutions. So hardly anything with public, and there is so much of scope. The PSU can also come with better pricing
to pick up money from the market.
Yeah, from the market. So
Right.
that is one. But the most important is because the I said the inflation and rate of interest is the high interest rate is the enemy of equity. There is no risk taking. There is no investor doesn't want to invest because he is bank deposit which is doing him well now.
But
So
post-tax
that is
is
why
not good.
primary
Post-tax
market
is
is
not
yeah.
good.
Interest rates come down, move towards it.
Right. We have Rajiv Gandhi scheme. Let us see what happens. Now, Nayak, I have two questions to you. One question is on debt market and one question is on rates. Now, believe me, in Ind AS, Indian Accounting Standard, which is a convergence route to IFRS, India has to take a carve out that any fair valuation for impairment testing, etc., has to be done as per the government bond rate. And for all calculation of CAPM, you have to take government bond rate because Indian corporate bond rate is not high. That's a carve out. But when you go to US, Canada, when I used to do their accounts in SI Group, I used to use that. The problem is that Indian debt market is not good, but is not expanding. Is expanding, but is not that big. But the Tandoori bond which has come to the market, so-called Tandoori bond, which you have mentioned about bond issued in foreign country where the exchange risk is passed on to the buyer of the bond. The question is not the money supply side. I believe money supply will be there because there is a huge arbitrage positioning in India. But what kind of readiness Indian corporate has to bring in their back office in terms of governance and assurance and collateralization to take advantage of this Tandoori bond?
I think main issue would be that of the regulator. Who is going to regulate? I think SEBI should take this Tandoori bond, as you call it, issuances into its own ambit. Like, let's say any public issue happens.
SEBI is quite that way creditable regulator worldwide.
Yes, and let's say in terms of the picture of governance, it has improved significantly during last 10 or 15 years. Indian corporates governance, large corporates have improved significantly, and these Tandoori bonds will be in the initial phase issued by the same set of corporates. Though it may take a lot of time, I guess these guys have to build the credibility for it to populate to the lower level of the corporates. But initially, this high credit quality and high governance perception companies are going to tap the market. And I think SEBI, RBI, and government, they should be ensuring that nothing goes wrong in terms of governance of these bonds. It's a very good point for the development of the market. I think Indian regulators should, because globally,
international financial institutions have already used Tandoori bonds.
They have used, but let's say something like IFC or ADB do not fall into the jurisdiction of the SEBI. But if something goes wrong there, nobody is going to blame Indian government for that. But let's say something goes by a large Indian corporate issuing those bonds, that can bring a lot of discredit to our name as a country or to that product.
And that will be the graveyard of bond market.
Yeah, so I think it's a good point. I think regulators allowing is one step, making sure that everything is governed properly and the corporates are adhering to the corporate governance related to this instruments is very important. I guess that's a thing with SEBI and RBI.
And the reverse is also true, that you can allow Indian corporate bonds to be subscribed by the overseas financial institutions. That is also true. That positioning has also been done. Coming to rates, if I am not wrong, as a student of finance, I understand that rates is a borrowed concept from overseas, which is fairly successful. But as you know, India needs rate kind of a organization. But rate has got multiple modeling, like for domestic dwelling houses, there is a rate, in commercial infrastructure, there is a rate. Concession structure like road, shipyards, so there can be kind of rates. What is your take that rate would be successful Do you allow, do you think that rates will be given sufficient independence like mutual funds are operating today, or government will do a lot of governance and overpowering into rates? What kind of things are going to emerge on rate?
I think it's like what is the right amount of regulation is a very difficult question to say. In the initial phase, as it is right now, I would say it is too much of regulation, and because of which the product, or too much of confusion about the taxation of it, because of which the product is not taking off. But that happens to the products at the initial stage. Initial stage, more informed customers will come in, and with the success of the story, the regulations over a period of time can be relaxed, or the taxes, and as more clarity on the taxation issues come, I guess the product will become more accessible, or regulator will make it more accessible to the retail investor also. So it's going to, I think it's a long journey. It's not that if you open up everything, it's going to take off immediately. That's what has been happening. Anything the current government does, the market has such high expectations that it looks like everything is going to explode next, and it's going to be a boom time. But it's not. Like in in finance industry, a lot of things is driven by trust, which builds because of the experience and governance, which takes a lot of time. So this is one of the enabler, and I think over the next 2-3 years we'll see a lot of relaxation in the regulation, a lot of clarity in the tax rule, and the product is here to going to stay.
So just one line answer from me for rate. Do you see rate for dwelling house, rate for commercial structure, and rate for concessional areas separate?
I guess like once the product becomes more acceptable, then people will try to find out. Right now it's coming
because the dynamics of the business is different.
Absolutely, and the risks associated are different. So they will be priced differently. So which will happen maybe at a later stage.
And one last point is that, do you see rate as a central organization or a state level organization? Because each state has its own peculiar issue.
Yeah, as I said, in the development of the corporate bond market also, unfortunately, most of the taxation part falls related to transaction costs, and falls under the states. So I don't have any issues of states managing it, but only thing it can be done is have a uniform rate all over the country.